Have you ever thought you knew someone completely, until the smallest crack shattered everything? This is the story of a man who believed in unbreakable love, only to discover secrets hidden just beneath the surface. As whispers of doubt turn into a storm of betrayal, he's forced into a painful search for truth, risking everything to find the answers. But will he survive the heartbreak? And can he rebuild a life for himself and his son from the ruins? Get ready for a journey of passion, betrayal, and resilience that will keep you hooked until the very end.
I used to believe our marriage was one of those rare, unbreakable things, solid, unshakable. But then, small cracks began to form, almost imperceptibly. At first, it was nothing, a strange sensation that I couldn't quite place, a prickling feeling that settled beneath my skin whenever I saw her glancing at her phone with that guarded little smile. I'd tell myself I was overthinking, that love sometimes gets tangled with paranoia, that I was making something out of nothing. But that tiny seed of discomfort kept growing, taking root somewhere deep inside me. It was when her ex reached out, just a casual friend request on social media, that the seed sprouted into something sharper, darker. She had laughed it off, tossing her hair back in that way that used to melt my worries. "Why would I ever want to reconnect with him?" she'd said, her tone light, almost teasing. And yet, I couldn't shake the way her laughter sounded. Too bright, too easy. The ease in her voice only made the pit in my stomach tighten, twisting until it became impossible to ignore. Each night, I'd lie beside her, watching the way the moonlight pooled on her skin, and I'd feel the strangest mix of desire and doubt. She looked peaceful, vulnerable, curled up against me, but it was as if a wall had risen between us, something invisible yet solid as stone. My hand would hover over her hip, wanting to pull her close, to let her warmth dissolve my fears, but I'd stop, fingers curling back to my own chest. I tried to convince myself that I was seeing ghosts, but the feeling was insidious. I couldn't banish it, no matter how often I told myself she was mine, no matter how much I tried to shake the dark thoughts creeping into my mind. And the more I tried to push it down, the more I began to realize that single request had opened a door. And now, there was no shutting it. It was just a request. Just a few pixels on a screen. But the way it lingered, it was as if he, her ex, had seeped into the edges of our life. She kept insisting it was nothing, barely worth mentioning, but somehow, just knowing he was out there, hovering around the corners of her digital world, made the air between us feel dense and charged, like the quiet before a storm. A few nights later, we were having dinner, and I couldn't stop watching her fingers as she texted someone under the table. Her smile flickered with each message, her eyes darting toward the screen before she looked back at me. She claimed it was a message from her sister, but something in her posture, in the way she angled the phone just out of my line of sight, twisted the knife a little deeper. I felt ridiculous. Part of me wanted to brush it off, laugh at myself for the jealousy gnawing at me, but each time she glanced away, each time she leaned away from me even slightly, a familiar itch spread through me. It was a longing I didn't know how to satisfy, and a burning suspicion I didn't know how to quench. I found myself searching for something in her, some hidden truth, as if her soft laughter or the casual way she kissed me goodnight could mask something darker. Then, one evening, I saw a notification flash briefly on her screen, a missed call. My stomach clenched when I glimpsed his name. Her face gave nothing away, as if it were perfectly ordinary, something to brush off, yet I couldn't unsee it. My mouth went dry as I tried to bring it up, to joke about it casually, but the words stuck in my throat, heavy and bitter. She said it was a mistake, a call that meant nothing, but a seed of doubt burrowed deep, one that kept urging me to look closer, to listen harder. As the days passed, I found myself watching her more closely, my mind lingering on every movement, every message, every look. She moved through our home like a shadow, slipping from one moment to the next as if always just out of my grasp. Even when she was close, she felt miles away, like a dream I was about to wake from, leaving me breathless and unsettled. And I couldn't shake the feeling that something, whether real or imagined, was lurking beneath the surface, taunting me to uncover it. There were nights when I couldn't sleep, haunted by memories of how things once were. I'd lie awake, feeling her soft breaths against my shoulder, and think back to the beginning, those early days when everything was fire and possibility. I remembered our first weekend away, a trip to the coast. We'd been together only a few months, and everything still felt electric, raw. The way she'd look at me, with a hunger that matched mine, made every glance feel like a promise. We spent hours tangled together, barely leaving the room, wrapped in a haze of laughter and whispered secrets. Her body was warm and yielding against mine, and I'd traced the curve of her spine as if mapping out something sacred, something I thought would always be mine. There was one moment, just before dawn, when I woke up to find her watching me. She'd brushed a strand of hair from my face, her gaze tender, and murmured, "I could stay like this forever." I had believed her, wholeheartedly, with a conviction so strong it felt like a vow. At that time, I couldn't imagine wanting anything more. Now, as she lay beside me, it felt like I was holding on to a ghost of those days. I could still trace her spine, but now it felt like following the outline of a memory slipping through my fingers. When she smiled at me, it didn't quite reach her eyes, as if there was something she kept hidden, tucked away just out of sight. And the quiet moments, the ones we used to fill with laughter and easy conversation, now stretched long and tense, like the air itself was holding its breath. I missed her, fiercely, even though she was right beside me. I missed the way she used to melt into me, her body soft and trusting. I missed the way her laugh would linger in the air, vibrant and carefree. Now, every touch felt careful, every kiss measured. It was as though an invisible line had been drawn between us, a line I couldn't cross no matter how much I reached out. I wanted that fire back. I wanted to feel her lose herself in me again, to see that unguarded, vulnerable part of her that used to light up whenever I was near. But all I found was silence, a silence that grew thicker with each passing day, filling the spaces where our passion used to be. I found myself spiraling, torn between love and suspicion, trust and doubt. Each day, the urge to know the truth gnawed at me, yet there was a shame that accompanied it, a shame that whispered maybe I was the problem, not her. That maybe I was letting jealousy fester into something that would eventually consume everything we had. At times, I'd catch myself watching her too closely, noting every flicker of emotion, every shift in her tone. I felt like a stranger in my own skin, hunting for signs that might not even be there. Was I imagining things? Had I turned into some kind of monster, seeing betrayal where there was none? I wanted to shake it off, to stop myself from sinking deeper into this abyss. But then I'd remember the look in her eyes when she'd mentioned his name, the casual way she'd dismissed my concerns. Was it arrogance on her part, a confidence that I'd never dig deeper? Or was I reading too much into everything, twisting her every action to fit some paranoid narrative? And yet, I couldn't deny the thrill, the forbidden pull of needing to know. The idea that she might be hiding something awakened a dark curiosity in me. I knew it was wrong. Part of me despised myself for wanting to invade her privacy, for needing to unearth her secrets like this. But that only made the desire more intense, more irresistible. I'd stand in the bathroom, staring at myself in the mirror, searching for the man I once was. The man who'd held her in his arms on that first night, vowing to protect her, to trust her. Had I lost him somewhere along the way? Or was this just who I had become, a lover scorned, trapped in a cycle of distrust, desperate for answers that might tear me apart? I tried, night after night, to let it go, to hold her close and forget. But the questions lingered, taunting me, daring me to find out if the woman lying in my arms was still mine, or if she'd slipped beyond my reach without me ever noticing. That night, I couldn't hold it in any longer. The weight of my doubts was crushing, pressing down on me until I felt like I'd choke on the silence between us. She was brushing her hair at the vanity, her back to me, and I watched her in the mirror, searching her reflection for something, anything that might bring me peace. "Why did he call you?" I asked, my voice lower than I'd intended. She froze, her hand lingering mid-stroke, then slowly set the brush down. Her eyes met mine in the mirror, wide and startled, as if she hadn't expected the question to come so bluntly. She took a breath, steadying herself before speaking. "It was a mistake," she said, her voice calm, almost rehearsed. "He didn't mean to. I told you. It's nothing." But the reassurance fell flat, as hollow as an empty echo. I stepped closer, unable to stop myself, the intensity building like a storm. "Nothing," I repeated, my words rougher now. "You're telling me it meant nothing. But why does it feel like you're hiding something?" She turned to face me, her gaze sharp, defensive. "Are you seriously accusing me of something, just because of a missed call?" Her voice held a mix of hurt and anger, but there was something else there, too, a flicker in her eyes, a tension that didn't belong. I tried to ignore it, to look past my own insecurities, but the doubt had grown into something too fierce to quiet. My hand reached for her, fingers grazing her wrist as if grounding myself in the feel of her skin might pull me back from the edge. "I just need to know," I whispered, the vulnerability catching in my throat. "If there's anything you haven't told me." For a moment, her face softened, and I thought she might tell me something real, something raw. But then her gaze hardened, and she pulled her wrist from my grasp. "I've told you everything," she replied, her voice cold and unyielding. "This obsession, this jealousy, it's all in your head." Her words cut deep, striking at something vulnerable in me. My heart pounded, the ache so fierce it was almost unbearable. I wanted to believe her, to let her words calm the fire raging inside me, but there was no comfort in her tone, no warmth in her gaze. She had shut me out, building walls with every word, and it only fueled my desperation. Silence filled the room, thick and suffocating. I searched her face, my own emotions spilling over, raw and exposed. And as I looked at her, feeling both anger and longing, I realized that whatever trust we'd once shared had slipped through my fingers, lost to the doubt now lodged firmly between us. In the days that followed, I felt like I was unraveling. The confrontation hadn't brought any relief. If anything, it left a deeper wound. Her coldness that night, her refusal to offer anything beyond her anger, kept replaying in my mind like a haunting melody. I wanted to believe her. God, how I wanted to believe her, but trust felt like something that had slipped through my grasp, replaced by an emptiness I couldn't shake. One evening, while she was out, I found myself standing over her phone, the screen dim and silent on the counter. It was a moment I'd sworn I'd never sink to, a line I never thought I'd cross. But my hand reached out, trembling as I picked it up, the quiet war in my mind growing louder. Was I willing to betray her privacy, to violate her trust, in search of answers that might only confirm my worst fears? My pulse raced as I unlocked the phone, my fingers moving almost mechanically, one step closer to discovering the truth I'd both dreaded and needed. Her messages loaded, one after another, until I found them, the short exchanges with him, the little notes I'd somehow known would be there. They weren't explicit, but each word, each smiley face, each midnight timestamp left little room for doubt. A sickening blend of relief and despair washed over me, the validation cutting deep. I'd been right, and yet, I wished I hadn't been. The proof I sought only brought me to a place I'd never wanted to reach, confirming that everything we'd built was now steeped in lies. When she returned, I knew what I had to say. I met her in the living room, the room that had once held our laughter, our whispered secrets, our plans for a future I'd believed was ours alone. My voice shook as I told her what I'd found, as I let the anger and hurt spill out in words I could barely control. She tried to deny it at first, tried to twist it back on me, but the truth was there, stark and undeniable. "I can't do this anymore," I whispered, the words foreign and painful on my tongue. I dreamed of a future with her, of growing old by her side, but now all I saw was the shadow of a love I could no longer trust. I thought I could move past it. I thought I could forget. But I can't. Her face went pale, and for a moment I saw a flicker of something real, regret, maybe even sorrow. But it was too late. The damage had been done, and I couldn't bear to live in a love that had become a lie. That night, I packed my things, moving through the rooms we'd once shared with a hollow ache in my chest. I left behind the pieces of a life I'd cherished, walking out the door with only the faintest hope that someday, somehow, I might find a way to heal. The first night alone was suffocating. I lay in the silence of an unfamiliar bed, surrounded by the reminders of everything I'd left behind. The sheets were cold, and the emptiness beside me felt like a gaping wound. Memories of her, her laughter, her touch, the way she'd curl into me in the middle of the night, haunted me with a merciless clarity. I couldn't escape her presence, even when she was no longer there. For days, maybe weeks, I drifted through life in a fog. I'd go to work, meet friends, smile at the right moments, but inside, it felt like something essential had been stripped away. I carried the weight of the betrayal, replaying every look, every kiss, wondering if any of it had ever been real. I questioned myself, too, what I had done wrong, if I could have saved us, if maybe I'd driven her away with my own insecurities. Eventually, I knew I needed help. Carrying this pain alone was unbearable, so I started seeing a therapist, someone who could listen without judgment. At first, I could barely bring myself to talk about it, to lay bare the raw, unfiltered truth of my heartbreak. But with time, The words came, spilling out like a dam breaking. I told her about the love we'd shared, the life we'd built, and how it all crumbled in an instant. Sometimes, she said, healing isn't about finding answers. It's about accepting that some things break, and that's not a reflection of your worth. Those words clung to me, a small comfort in the storm. I began to realize that healing didn't mean forgetting or pretending it hadn't happened. It meant facing the hurt, letting it cut me, and finding a way to live with the scars. It meant recognizing that I was more than this loss, that there was a part of me still worth saving. Slowly, I started to reclaim my life. I found new routines, took up old hobbies, reconnected with friends I'd let drift away. I began to build a version of myself outside of us, discovering pieces of who I'd been before her and finding strength in those parts I'd forgotten. There were days when I'd still feel the ache, a longing that hit me without warning. Some nights, I'd reach for the empty space beside me, only to remember that she was gone. But each time, I held myself together a little better, letting the pain pass without letting it consume me. I knew I wasn't fully healed, that the memories would still linger, soft and bittersweet. But as time moved on, I felt a glimmer of hope. I was learning to let go, to forgive myself for what I couldn't change, and to believe, cautiously, that one day I might find love again, not as the man broken by betrayal, but as someone who had found strength in survival. As the dust began to settle, there was one part of my life that I couldn't let fall apart: my son. His well-being became my anchor, a purpose that pulled me through the darkest moments. I knew this separation would be hard on him. He was too young to fully understand why our family had shattered, yet old enough to sense the tension, the absence of his mother in our home. I couldn't let him see the cracks in me. Each morning, I forced myself to rise before him, to pull on a brave face, even when my chest felt hollow and raw. I made sure he knew that our time together was safe, that no matter what had happened between his mother and me, he was loved, unconditionally and deeply. But when it came to custody, things were tense. My ex-wife and I both wanted to be part of his life, yet navigating this new arrangement felt like another test of resilience. Every conversation about schedules or visitation seemed to ignite lingering resentments, our words tangled in the bitterness that still lingered. We had to meet with lawyers, sign documents that felt sterile and brutal, each piece of paper another reminder of how our lives had unraveled. There were moments I wanted to give in, to let her take control if it meant preserving some peace. But then I'd look at him, my son, my heart, and know I couldn't bear to be anything less than fully present. He was my motivation, my reason to keep going, to make a life that was stable and full, despite the storm that had torn it apart. Gradually, I built a new routine for us. We'd make pancakes on Sunday mornings, batter splattering as he laughed, forgetting the sadness that hung in the corners of our lives. I took him to the park, taught him to ride a bike, and watched as he found joy in the smallest moments. Each day, he reminded me of what I still had, grounding me in a love that was pure and untainted. Through him, I found a new strength, a reason to push forward, to rebuild not just for myself but for us both. I focused on creating a home that was warm, safe, and welcoming, a place where he could grow without the shadows of what had happened between his mother and me. I wanted him to know that, even if our family had changed, he would always have both of us in his life, surrounded by love. In time, the pain dulled, and though there were still echoes of what once was, I found comfort in the life we were building together. I couldn't rewrite the past, nor erase the scars that betrayal had left on me, but I could give him the stability and love he deserved. And in doing so, I felt myself heal, piece by piece, learning to find peace in the remnants of what had once been a broken love.
Keep watching our stories by clicking on one of the videos that appear on the screen, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to be alerted about new videos. See you next time.